This 1869 photograph appeared serene until they noticed something disturbing about the girl's neck. The basement of the Charleston Historical Society smelled like old paper and forgotten promises. Emma Jenkins sipped her lukewarm coffee as the scanner hummed, converting yet another Civil War-era photograph into digital form. After 3 months of this project, most images blurred together. Somber men in uniform, stern-faced families, abandoned plantations. Just 2 boxes left, she muttered to herself, lifting a yellowed photograph labeled simply Plantation Family, 1869. The image showed the typical arrangement. A wealthy white family seated on their porch, furniture dragged outside for the occasion. The father stood rigidly behind his seated wife, hand on her shoulder, 2 young boys in sailor suits flanking them. Behind them all, nearly blending into the shadows, stood a young black girl in a simple dress, no more than 12 years old. Emma almost placed it directly into the scanner when something made her pause. The girl's expression was different from the vacant stares usually captured in such photos. There was something in her eyes, a defiance, a presence. "Let's see what the high-res shows," Emma whispered, adjusting the scanner settings to maximum resolution. When the enhanced image appeared on her monitor, Emma's breath caught. She zoomed in on the girl's neck, where the shadows had hidden something. At normal resolution, it was barely visible, but now, "Dr. Reynolds needs to see this," she said, reaching for her phone, her hand trembling slightly. Later that evening, as rain pelted the windows of the museum's research room, Emma and Dr. Reynolds stared at the enlarged image in silence. The museum director finally spoke. 4 years after emancipation, this shouldn't be possible. "But it's right there," Emma replied, pointing to the strange marking on the girl's neck. "And I need to know why." The museum director's office felt unusually cold the next morning. Emma sat across from Dr. Reynolds, who studied the photograph with a magnifying glass, his brow furrowed. "I've approved your research request," he said finally. 2 weeks. That's all I can spare you from the digitization project." Emma nodded, already planning her approach. "I'll start with the property records. The photo came from the Harrison donation, right?" "Yes, but be careful, Emma." Dr. Reynolds removed his glasses. "The Harrisons still have considerable influence in the city. Their family foundation funds half our exhibitions." "This is historical research, not an exposé," Emma assured him, though something in his warning unsettled her. That afternoon, she found herself in the county records office, surrounded by leather-bound deed books. The Harrison plantation, Magnolia Grove, had passed through 4 generations before being parceled and sold in the 1920s. The 1860 slave census listed 47 people as property. No names, just ages and genders. A girl of approximately 6 years would have been 12 by 1869. Emma photographed the pages, then moved to the Freedmen's Bureau records. Hours passed as she searched for any mention of the Harrison plantation, any record of abuses reported after emancipation. As the office was closing, she found it. A complaint filed in August 1868 by a former slave named Isaiah. The handwritten note alleged that James Harrison was still keeping workers against their will after emancipation. The investigation outcome was marked with a single word: unfounded. Outside, the sticky Charleston heat enveloped her as her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "Ms. Jenkins, this is Thomas Harrison. I understand you're researching my family's history. Perhaps we should meet." Emma froze on the museum steps, wondering how he already knew. Kaywood Tea Room occupied the ground floor of a pre-revolutionary building on Church Street. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance. When Thomas Harrison walked in, she immediately recognized the family resemblance to the man in the photograph. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice carrying the polished accent of old Charleston money. "Our family has maintained an interest in the Historical Society for generations." "I appreciate your time," Emma replied, studying him. Thomas appeared to be in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a seersucker suit despite the heat. "I'm researching post-Civil War documentation of former slave-owning families." "A delicate subject," Thomas nodded. The Harrisons, like many Southern families, had to reinvent themselves after the war, not always gracefully. Emma removed the photograph from her folder, sliding it across the table. "This was among your family's donated items." Thomas glanced at it without touching it. "My great-grandfather James and his family, taken shortly after they reclaimed Magnolia Grove from the Union occupiers. And the girl standing behind them?" His eyes flicked briefly to the girl's figure before returning to Emma's face. "A household servant, I presume. Many former slaves continued working for their previous owners after emancipation. Economic necessity?" Emma tapped the photo. "I noticed something unusual on her neck when digitizing." "Oh," Thomas took a slow sip of his tea. "Photography from that era is notoriously unreliable. Blemishes, exposure problems. This doesn't look like a photographic error." The pleasant veneer slipped for just a moment. "Ms. Jenkins, what exactly are you implying about my family?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm researching historical documentation. History is rarely as clear as we'd like." Thomas stood, leaving his tea untouched. "Some archives at Magnolia Grove remain private. Family matters, you understand." The threat beneath his courtesy was unmistakable. "One more question," Emma said. "Who was Isaiah?" Thomas Harrison paused, his knuckles whitening around his walking stick. "Good day, Miss Jenkins. Emma's apartment was small, but had the benefit of a second bedroom converted into a home office. That night, she spread her research across her desk, creating a timeline. The Harrison plantation had been temporarily seized by Union forces in 1865, but returned to the family by 1867. James Harrison had signed loyalty oaths to regain his property, though not as slaves. Yet the 1870 census showed 17 black laborers still living on Harrison land. Her phone pinged with an email notification. Dr. Reynolds had sent access credentials to the museum's facial recognition database, used primarily for identifying unknown subjects in historical photographs. With trembling fingers, she uploaded the enhanced image of the girl's face and started the search. As the database worked, Emma scrolled through digitized editions of the Charleston Mercury from 1868-1870. A small article from November 1868 caught her attention. Negro man found dead near Ashley River. The brief report mentioned an unidentified black man discovered with fatal injuries, presumed to be the result of misadventure or Negro quarrel. The facial recognition search completed with a single match. A group photograph from the 1880 opening of a colored school in North Charleston. Among the students stood a young woman, now in her 20s. The caption listed names, including Clara Freeman, teacher's assistant. Emma stared at the face. Older but unmistakably the same person from the plantation photograph. She had survived. She had a name. A sharp knock at her apartment door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a police officer. "Miss Jenkins? We've had reports of suspicious activity in this building. May I come in?" Emma hesitated, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. "I can show my badge again if you'd like," the officer said through the door. Emma kept the chain latched as she examined his credentials more carefully. "Officer Dwayne Morris, Charleston PD. Sorry for the caution," she said, finally letting him in. "What kind of suspicious activity?" "Neighbor reported someone trying doorknobs on this floor," he explained, glancing around her apartment. His eyes lingered on her research-covered desk, just checking each unit. Something felt off. The officer seemed more interested in her papers than searching for an intruder. "Well, I haven't noticed anything," Emma said, casually moving to stand between him and her desk. "You work at the museum, right? My cousin Marcus works security there." Emma nodded cautiously. "Night shift?" "That's right." His radio crackled and he adjusted the volume. "Well, everything looks secure here. Lock up after me." After he left, Emma called the police station. Officer Dwayne Morris had ended his shift 3 hours ago. Heart racing, she packed essential research materials and her laptop into a backpack. Someone had discovered her investigation and was already taking countermeasures. She needed to move quickly. An hour later, she checked into a budget motel under a fake name, paying cash. In her room, she examined the photograph of Clara Freeman again, noticing something she'd missed, a small pendant around the woman's neck, partially hiding the marking that had first caught Emma's attention. Emma enlarged the image of the pendant. It appeared to be a small iron key on a leather cord. She searched census records until she found a Clara Freeman in the 1900 Charleston census, listed as age 43, occupation school teacher, with a North Charleston address. If Clara had lived into the 1900s, she might have left behind letters, diaries, or even spoken accounts. Former slaves had been interviewed for oral history projects in the 1930s. Emma's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging if you know what's good for you." Her hand trembled, but her resolve strengthened. Clara's story deserved to be told. The North Charleston Library's Special Collections Department housed several oral history collections. Emma had arrived at opening, introducing herself as a museum researcher working on early post-emancipation education. The archivist, an elderly black woman named Miss Pearson, regarded her with curious eyes. "Clara Freeman? That's not a name I've heard researchers ask about before." She disappeared into the stacks, returning with a thin archival box. "We have a Works Progress Administration interview with her from 1937, shortly before she passed." Emma's heart raced as she opened the folder containing the typewritten transcript. Clara had been 80 years old when interviewed, one of the last living people born into slavery in Charleston County. The interview focused mainly on her educational work, but toward the end, the interviewer had asked about her childhood. "I was born on Magnolia Grove Plantation," Clara had stated. "After the war, my father Isaiah tried to leave with me, but the master wouldn't allow it. Said we owed debts that had to be worked off. My father disappeared in '68. They told us he ran off, but I knew better." Emma's breath caught. "Isaiah, the same man who had filed the complaint with the Freedmen's Bureau," Clara continued. "I remained until I was 16. What choice did I have? A child alone? But I kept my father's key safe, like he told me to." The interview ended abruptly there with a note from the interviewer. The subject became distressed and declined to continue. "Miss Pearson," Emma asked, "do you have any other records relating to Clara Freeman? Personal effects, letters?" "The oral histories were collected as text only," she replied. "But," she hesitated. "Clara Freeman has a great-granddaughter who still lives in North Charleston, Elaine Watson. She teaches at the community college. Would you have her contact information?" Miss Pearson smiled gently. "I'm not supposed to share that, but I can tell you that Professor Watson teaches American history on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons." Emma nodded, understanding the implied help. "Thank you. You've been incredibly helpful. As she left the library, Emma noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street. It pulled into traffic behind her. Charleston Community College was a cluster of modern buildings surrounding a small quad. Emma found Professor Watson's classroom and waited outside as students filed out after the afternoon lecture. Elaine Watson looked to be in her 60s, with silver-streaked dreadlocks pulled back in a professional style. She was gathering papers when Emma entered. "Professor Watson, my name is Emma Jenkins. I'm researching your great-grandmother, Clara Freeman." The professor looked up sharply. "Are you from the Historical Society?" "Yes, but this research is somewhat unofficial." Emma explained her discovery of the photograph and Clara's interview. Professor Watson studied her for a long moment. "Why are you really interested in my great-grandmother?" "Because someone tried to erase her story," Emma replied honestly. "And now people are trying to stop me from uncovering it." Something in her words seemed to convince the professor. "Come with me." They drove in silence to a small bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. Inside, Professor Watson unlocked a wooden chest in her living room. "Our family history," she explained, removing a small wooden box. "Clara left this for her descendants, said it was proof of what really happened at Magnolia Grove." Inside the box lay a small iron key on a leather cord, the same pendant from the photograph, alongside a folded piece of paper with faded handwriting. "This was written by Isaiah, Clara's father," Professor Watson explained, "before he disappeared." Emma carefully unfolded the paper. It was a hand-drawn map of Magnolia Grove Plantation, with an X marking a spot near the river. In the margin were written the words, "The truth lies here. The key unlocks more than doors." "My family has protected this for generations," Professor Watson said, "but we never knew what it meant. The plantation was subdivided long ago." Emma studied the map. The section is now the Harrison Wildlife Preserve. Privately owned, but the old plantation house still stands as a historical site. "Be careful," Professor Watson warned. "The Harrisons have protected their reputation for over a century." "What about the mark on Clara's neck in the photograph? Do you know what it was?" The professor's eyes darkened. "Family lore says it was a brand after emancipation when they couldn't legally own her anymore." The Harrison Wildlife Preserve closed to visitors at dusk. Emma had arrived earlier, paying for admission and wandering the manicured grounds as a tourist. Now, with night falling, she slipped away from the designated paths, following the aged map toward the river. The modern boundaries didn't exactly match the old plantation layout, but Emma had correlated landmarks. An unusual bend in the river, an ancient oak that would have been young in Isaiah's time. Using her phone's flashlight, she navigated through underbrush until she reached the approximate location of the X on the map. Nothing immediately stood out, just overgrown forest. Then her light caught something, a pile of stones too orderly to be natural. Emma began carefully removing them, revealing what appeared to be an old cellar door, long abandoned and reclaimed by nature. The iron key from Clara's pendant was small, possibly for a lockbox rather than this door. Emma continued clearing debris, finding the rusted hinges of the door completely seized with age. Using a fallen branch as leverage, she managed to pry it open with a groan of protesting metal. Stale air wafted up from the darkness below. Emma hesitated, then began descending the crumbling stairs, the beam of her flashlight illuminating a small underground room. It had once been a storage cellar, but the shelves now held only dust. In the corner, however, stood a small metal box, rusted but intact. The key fit perfectly. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger and a folded newspaper clipping from 1868. The ledger was a secret account book, recording the continued ownership and sale of people after emancipation had made slavery illegal. James Harrison and several other plantation owners had created a private system to maintain their human property through debt and intimidation. The newspaper clipping was the complete version of the article she'd seen before. Negro man found dead near Ashley River. But this version included details omitted from the public record. The man had been identified as Isaiah Freeman and bore distinctive marks of whipping and torture. Emma photographed everything with trembling hands. This was evidence of crimes covered up for generations. A sound from above made her freeze. Voices, flashlight beams. She wasn't alone anymore. Emma extinguished her light, heart pounding. Footsteps moved across the ground above, too deliberate for random hikers. "Check down there," a male voice commanded. A powerful flashlight beam swept down the stairs. Emma pressed herself against the wall, clutching the ledger and key. There was no other exit. "Ms. Jenkins," called a familiar voice. Thomas Harrison. "This is private property after hours. Why don't you come up and we can discuss what you found?" His reasonable tone contrasted with the implied threat. Emma remained silent, mind racing. "You're trespassing on Harrison land. That's a criminal offense," he continued. "However, I'm willing to overlook it. The museum needs its funding after all." When she didn't respond, footsteps descended the stairs. Emma made a split-second decision, tucking the evidence into her backpack and stepping forward. "Mr. Harrison," she said, shielding her eyes from the blinding flashlight. "I was just leaving." The man accompanying Thomas wore a security uniform but carried himself like law enforcement, possibly the same impersonator who'd come to her apartment. "That's museum property you're carrying," Thomas said, pointing to her backpack. "Actually, it's evidence of historical crimes. Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Crimes your family concealed for generations." Thomas's expression hardened. "History is complicated, Miss Jenkins. My ancestors did what was necessary during a difficult transition period. They murdered Isaiah Freeman and continued enslaving people illegally," Emma countered. "That's not complicated, it's criminal." "Those accusations would be difficult to prove after 150 years, Thomas said coldly, "and damaging to many prominent Charleston families, including current donors to your museum." Emma took a step toward the stairs. "I'm leaving now." "The ledger and key stay," Thomas insisted. "Everything I've found has already been backed up and sent to secure locations," Emma lied, hoping her bluff wasn't transparent, "including to Professor Watson and the Charleston Justice Project." Uncertainty flashed across Thomas's face for the first time. His security guard looked to him for instructions. "Let her pass," Thomas finally said. "This isn't over, Miss Jenkins. Some history is better left buried." "Oh." Emma climbed the stairs, expecting to be stopped any moment. She walked steadily away, not breaking into a run until she was well into the woods, the sound of pursuit never materializing behind her. 1 month later, Emma stood before the new exhibition at the Charleston Historical Society. Untold Stories, Resistance and Survival After Emancipation. At its center hung the digitally enhanced photograph of the Harrison family with Clara Freeman standing behind them, the brand on her neck now clearly visible. Beside it was a display case containing the iron key and Isaiah's map, on permanent loan from the Freeman-Watson family collection. The exhibition had drawn record crowds and national media attention. Dr. Reynolds had been furious at first, then pragmatic when the publicity brought new funding sources to replace the withdrawn Harrison endowment. Emma felt a presence beside her and turned to find Professor Watson studying the photograph. "She looks like my mother around the eyes," the professor observed. Strong, even then. The ledger provided enough evidence to rename 3 campus buildings and a park that had honored slave owners, Emma noted. "The Historical Commission is reviewing others," Professor Watson nodded. "Small justice, but something. Isaiah would be proud that his evidence finally came to light." Emma watched as visitors moved through the exhibition, reading the stories of Clara, Isaiah, and others who had resisted their continued bondage after emancipation. The complete newspaper article about Isaiah's murder was displayed alongside the ledger pages documenting illegal enslavement. "The Harrisons have left town," Professor Watson mentioned. "Rumors say they've moved to their property in Virginia." "Running from history," Emma remarked. "But they can't escape it anymore," the professor replied. "Clara kept that key for a reason. She knew someday someone would use it to unlock the truth." Outside, Charleston carried on, its genteel beauty now revealing more of its complicated past to those willing to see. Emma watched a school group enter the museum, young faces curious about stories long hidden from them. "What will you research next?" Professor Watson asked. Emma smiled slightly. "There are still plenty of old photographs in our archives. Who knows what else they might be hiding in plain sight?" The truth, once buried, had finally emerged into the light, just as Clara and Isaiah had hoped it would.